Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Vulture's Rainbow Theatre. I am your melodramatic and pretentious host, Mr. Damon Vulture, bringing you, after a long hiatus, a new story by the newest addition to our Vulture's Rainbow staff of writers. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Tony Stregonona and his first dark science fiction effort for our theater. Please turn off the lights and listen with bated breath to The Reefers. This is Yeoman Second Class Darren Santini of the USSDF Zumwalt, our ship currently on a return trajectory from the Beta Centauri system. At the moment, we're supposed to be operating with Defense Task Force Alpha 2, returning to Earth after a 4-year tour of duty. We served our time out there in the Beta Centauri, visited our ports of call, and finished up by doing what every Defense Task Force does, going into orbit around Frontera 4 until the next task force arrives, in our case Alpha 1. The wait turned out to be a lot longer than usual. Alpha 1 got caught up in a political crisis back home and didn't even leave Earth orbit until about a year after they were supposed to be on their way. That was their story anyway. This caused a logistical problem aboard the ships, namely that we started running out of grub a few months into the wait. At first, Beta Centauri Command wanted to do a vert rep, a vertical replenishment, by having their supply packets launch up from Frontera with supplies and pass them on to us by docking in orbit. But when DEFCOM Earth realized how long the wait was going to be, they nixed that idea and ordered the whole task force to land in Frontera 4's northern hemisphere, near the subpolar colony of Ishtar. It is a huge colony with food processing plants and overland shipping capabilities that could wheel out the really massive quantities of food and other stuff we were going to need for the return trip, since our stores had gotten depleted orbiting for 370 days around Frontera. Plus, they could supply new reactor cores for our engines and refit a couple of our damaged ships there, particularly the USSDF Harriet Tubman, which suffered a major hull breach due to collision with flying rock. That happened out in the asteroid belt between the orbits of Frontera 4 and the gas giant Ferenci Nureyev. The crew on the Zumwalt were pretty freaking happy about these developments because a starship on land with its engine shut down meant that we went from 2 duty sections, port and starboard, to 6 sections. In other words, instead of working a 24-hour day every other day, each section only had to pull duty like that once every 6 days. This meant more time off for us, more rest, and above all, it meant liberty in Ishtar for crew members who were not in the sections on duty. Now, Ishtar ain't much of a liberty port, but I'd rather be hunting for beer and poontang in downtown Ish than sitting out in orbit for the 375th consecutive day. So we celebrated when we got the news, put on our dress blues, and brought the Zumwalt down next to the space tender Melania Trump in the freezing tundra, stretching out away from Frontera 4's polar ice cap. It was really a sight, all those ships sitting on the frozen tundra. I mean, usually space crew like us are like butlers and footmen in one of those old-timey big houses. We operate in our workspaces and do what we're told. We never get a look at the big picture. But when you see the whole fleet anchored there, the big spaceships and the cruisers, the stealth fighters and the spacecraft carriers, now that's really a sight. You feel like you're part of something important. You just wish to hell you knew what it was. The first few days we stayed in port and starboard duty, which made everybody mad as hell, because we were jumping for that liberty on the beach. But you can't just shut starship engines down cold like that. You gotta bring them down gradually. Eventually, we went to 6 sections like we'd been promised, and I got my chance to catch a shuttle bus into Ishtar for some R&R. Usually when it's time to hit the beach, I go with my wingman, EM3 Fritz Romano, and this crazy mother from Roxbury, a big-ass fighting red-haired reactor engineer named Archie O'Halloran. Fritz is my man for hooking up with the local sweetmeat. The girls go for him, practically throw themselves down at his feet, and he can usually talk a couple of his groupies into pairing off with Archie and me as consolation prizes. Hey, I'll take my women any way I can get 'em. Archie now, he's about as charming as a lunar garbage orbiter. But the mouth on that guy, once he gets 2 or 3 beers in him and starts telling stories, he can really kill. I mean, first it's just us laughing at his jokes and tall tales, but then everyone else starts listening in. He can render everyone within hearing distance helpless, practically peeing themselves with the funny crap he says. You want to have a good time on the beach? You do it with Fritz and Archie. So we hop into the shuttle and get driven for almost 2 hours across this flat land carpeted with some kind of frozen undergrowth under a white sky. We wore peacoats over our dress blues and non-regulation watch caps because it was cold, not just outside but in the shuttle itself. Finally, Ishtar comes into view. It's funny how a place can be jaw-dropping awesome on one hand and a big disappointment at the same time. I mean, as we approach this gigantic colony, we can see that the middle of it sort of looks like a city on Earth with big high-rise structures towering up into the stratosphere, and all around the outskirts of this downtown we can see the smaller buildings, tens of thousands of them, some of them looking like maybe they're office buildings, thousands of much smaller prefab structures that look like houses and apartments. Everything is metal and plastic and concrete. But then we can see that there's something about the atmosphere that makes all the metal shit rust big time, so that pretty much every metal object or surface we see is a kind of dirty, runny brown with bright, moist patches of day-glow orange oxidation that looks like wet sheets of fungal growth. And this rust runs in long, soupy lines down the concrete and plastic panels of the buildings. The streets are all paved, but that undergrowth we saw out on the tundra bursts through the tarmac everywhere, opening it up and cracking it and crazing it, giving every street the forlorn, broken-up look you would see on an old stretch of abandoned boulevard you'd find in a long, evacuated old city on Earth. The high-rise buildings downtown turned out not to be buildings at all, but giant processing columns for refining fuels or recycling the waste from underground factories. Sometimes from vents in the streets, we could see big clouds of condensation coming from the hot industrial plants below the ground, and sometimes this steam would mingle with the freezing rain of sudden cloudbursts from the white sky above us. And since we were arriving at the end of our workday, it was starting to get dark. I hadn't been looking at the driver. I mean, all I could see was the back of his head. But finally, he brings the shuttle to a stop on a rainy, busted-up street with grimy neon signs lit up along it. Not too many local people out in the cold, just mostly big bunches of space crew from the fleet, shuffling along between the bars and the grub houses we could see out there. Anyway, I hadn't been looking at the driver, but now he stops the shuttle and turns to tell us, "Funtown Boulevard, this is your stop." When he says Funtown, he isn't smiling, and his face and hands, I notice, look like they haven't been getting much in the way of circulation. He's not blue exactly, but he might as well have been. "Get a load of this guy," I told Archie. "Looks like he spent the night in a freezer." Archie nodded. "Frontera 4, dumbass," he said back to me. "He spent his entire freaking life in a freezer." We step out into the rainy cold and start scanning the neon displays for something inviting. We see a place called the 69 Hotel Bar and Grill. That sounded promising. Anything that suggested hot foods, booze, and kinky sex all in the same name was destined to get our attention. We made a beeline for the place, considering ourselves now officially on the prowl. The doorman, a human with the same bluish face and hands as the shuttle driver, rolled out a flat little speech he was supposed to give guests. Boredom, apathy, and maybe a little disgust clearly heard in his delivery. "Welcome to the 69 Hotel, gentlemen. The bar is on your right." To our left, we could see a worn-down old lobby with a grubby counter. Behind it, a wasted-looking hotel clerk with the same bluish skin, a withered smoker's mouth, tickety-tacking away on a keyboard, his eyes fixed to a screen we couldn't see, doing accounts or emailing his sister. Who knew? We weren't ready to rent 30-minute rooms just yet. The last shuttle would leave at 2200, which gave us 5 hours to hunt for liquor, culinary delight, and crude meatball romance in this sad and freezing port of call. We went to the right, where the drinks, the chow, and possibly the physical entertainment was waiting. We'd saved the rooms to the left for later. The doorman had us pegged. The frowsy plastic menu promised that the 69 Bar and Grill was the home of the savory Mammoth Burger. Rumor had it that the Mammoth of Frontera 4 was actually a kind of giant ice worm hunted and caught in the Boreana Mountains just north of the Arctic Circle, but supposedly it tasted like beef when grilled right and served on a bun. This, according to communications mate first class Donnie Breyer, a lifer who never went on Liberty anymore. Whenever the gangplank dropped on a foreign planet, he took a shower, put on fresh skivvies, and hopped up into his bunk where he slept until the master-at-arms or roving patrol woke him up for duty. Still, he'd been to Frontera beaucoup times and knew the ropes. I decided to trust him on the burger and ordered it along with a bottle of Red Star beer. While my friends are deciding what they want, I let my eyes wander. And yes, the 69 in the name meant something here. The place was crawling with working girls, some getting a poor schlub to buy them drinks, the schlub thinking he was getting the girl drunk prior to some free exercise in Cupid's gym upstairs in the hotel, the girl milking him for the cash she was spending on the drinks, with her drinks just being colored water. Then the bar would give her part of the take after the schlub passed out under the table, having missed his chance for 30 minutes of third-rate romance upstairs. And some of the girls were looking for more serious customers, for someone who really did want to spend the bread for 30 minutes upstairs in the grubby pleasure palace they called the hotel. Now, I gotta tell you before I go on that before we land anywhere for Liberty, the chief medical corpsman always sits us down for a talk about the dangers of too much fun ashore, or sometimes he makes a video out of it, and we have to watch it when we muster for quarters and inspection. For the first 2 years I was aboard the Zumwalt, our division officer was this apple-cheeked college boy that would blush when he introduced the latest video on the facts of life from the corpsman. But when he was rotated out to engineering, we got this crusty old warrant officer from operations who preferred to give us our info straight. "At ease and listen up, dummies," he growled at our last muster the morning of the day we would get to go ashore. "You saw the video, but it's not everything you need to know. The Surgeon General says there ain't no scientific evidence to back it up, but what I'm going to tell you is the truth. On Frontera, if you go out to dip your wick, most diseases you pick up out there can be treated. The corpsman can pump your hind end with 2 good shots of antibiotic and you're out of trouble. But if you get the white sif, you're as good as dead." We already knew about the legendary and mythical white syphilis, but Space Crew apprentice Carraway wanted to see if he could embarrass Warrant Officer Hicks by getting him sharing the gory details. Hicks was SOL with that because Hicks told S.A. Carraway everything he knew without turning the slightest shade of pink. "This is how it is, S.A. Carraway. The rest of you listen, because this is about all of you. There's girls out there in Ishtar that'll take you for a ride in return for your money. They're nice looking, they smell nice, and they dress nice. You'll see plenty of haunch and plenty of fluffy white upper body construction. But some of those girls are sick. You can't always tell it by looking at them. The white sif is an infection that comes from some source on Frontera 4, yet to be identified. You get with the wrong girl. You catch a dose of the virus. First thing that happens is you start feeling hot all the time. You get to where you can't get cool, not even under a cooling vent, not even in a cold shower. Then you go ape shit and make for the freezers. Sometimes you find a guy that got him some down on Frontera 4, and later, out in space somewhere on the way back to Earth, you find him locked up in one of the reefers, lying prone next to the frozen meat, rock hard and blue as Carraway's balls are going to be by the time he gets back." We laughed at the cut down, and so did Carraway. But the idea that we would walk into a freezer to get cool and stay long enough to turn into a block of frozen meat gave us the willies. "That ain't all, though, is it, Mr. Hicks?" S.A. Carraway asked. Now he wasn't smiling anymore. "I think that about covers it, Carraway," he says back. "They walk around, don't they?" Carraway says. Hicks made one of those dismissive sounds, like you hear from an officer when a space crew says something stupid or ill-informed. "No, they don't walk around, Carraway. They stay in the reefer, stacked up on top of the bacon slabs." "That's not what I heard. I heard that during the night cycle they come out. They come out and walk around, and sometimes they take people back with them, to the reefer." "Well, you can just secure bullshit like that, Carraway," Hicks says. "There's not an official report in the fleet to back up stories like that, and I don't want to hear that you've been spreading this kind of misinformed crap around. Do you understand me, Carraway?" "Yes, Mr. Hicks." But Hicks was right. The disease was rare, and it rarely occurred in the fleet, but I knew of a guy on the space tender Chaco Canyon who caught the white sif during our last Centauri cruise, and that's where he ended up, in the freezer, in the reefer, frozen solid. I never did hear of him walking around the ship during the night cycle when they turned down the lights, but they did put a real good padlock on the reefer door. From what I heard, it was the most expensive and hardcore-looking padlock anyone on the Chaco Canyon ever saw. I remember kind of wondering about it at the time. So now here we are in the 69 Bar and Grill, working our way through one drink after another. At first, there were too many guys in there to get a girl's individual attention, but at 17:30, when most of the carrier crewmen were called out by Surface Patrol to board the shuttle, the place got fairly empty, and we find ourselves each with our own little sweethearts. I didn't even have to wait for Fritz to point one in my direction. Mine was this cat-like little creature with a warm complexion that didn't show any of that bluish tinge I was seeing in so many of the locals around here in Ishtar. She had a build that certainly got my attention and made me mentally count the money in my wallet. Would I have enough for a lap or two in Cupid's swimming pool of love? And would there be enough left over for the room to do it in? My return shuttle ticket was already paid for. I had drink money, so I didn't need to budget for transportation. So I'm sharing a drink with this girl whose name is something like Tiza or Diza. I can't quite pick it up from her accent. After the drink, she agrees that we're going to go upstairs for what I would call a prepaid romantic interlude. She laughs at something I say and puts a hand over her mouth, a normal kind of gesture when you're afraid you might spray your drink. And when she takes her hand away, there is a bluish streak on her face. I realize she's wiped away some makeup there. Her complexion is not warm, it's cold like everybody else's here, so I ask her, without telling her that her makeup is coming off, I ask her, Why do so many people have this bluish complexion around here? Is it the cold? She doesn't say anything, but the smile falters, and she sees my eye wandering to a place near her mouth. She pulls a mirror out of her purse and her face turns into marble. She ain't smiling at all now. Yeah, it's the cold, she says. Do you still want to go upstairs? She asks. No thanks, I tell her. You keep the money. Do you want me to stay a little while? There ain't nobody but you guys in this joint now. No, I say, get lost. So she gets up and walks off, hanging her purse over her arm, looking in her compact mirror and doing something with a finger to cover up the blue patch on her face. She walks out of the bar through the double door behind the counter and disappears into the kitchen. I look over at Arch, who's looking back at me and the girl leaving me, and then back at this girl he's with who's talking to Blue Street, trying to keep him charmed. I wave a no problem hand at him and he gets up to go off with his prize, out the door and over to the clerk in the lobby to check out a room for 30 minutes. Fritz leaves pretty quick right after that with his choice for the night. I'm sitting there, looking around, realizing it's getting late. Digital clock on the bar says 1850, which means we've got about 70 minutes before we got to be out waiting for the last shuttle bus. We're due back at 2200. If we're late getting to the Zumwalt or AWOL for duty the next morning, it'll be captain's mast that afternoon with extra duty and a fine for punishment. I notice again that the hall between the bar and the lobby is dark now. Someone has turned off the lights out there. Then there's a flicker in the bar as the whole grill area with its tables goes dark. I'm sitting at the table where we started and I can still see only because the bar itself is lit. But now I notice no one is there. No one is behind the bar to take orders and mix drinks, and no one's at any of the tables in the grill, just me. It's starting to feel a little weird and I get up. There's that double door Tiza went through next to the bar leading into the kitchen, and I can see light in there, so I slip behind the counter and plaster my nose to the square glass of a door window, looking to see if the staff have gone back there for a meeting. It's late for sure, but it's way too early for them to be closing down. Sure enough, I see some kind of manager back there paying everybody his take. The girls are there too, including the cat-like creature Diza I'd been with. He says stuff to all of them I can't hear, and they're listening and nodding, but also fanning themselves like it's hot in there, like they can't wait to get to an air conditioner somewhere. A couple of the girls look a little panicky and seem to be breaking into a sweat. I'm thinking it's not hot at all. It's so cold, in fact, that I'm wondering if they're heating the place at all. Finally, the manager shrugs his shoulders and then walks over to what looks to me like a walk-in freezer. He opens the door and some, but not all, of the staff wave like they're saying goodbye and walk into it. Not like they're being coerced, but like they're glad to be going in there. After which he shuts the door and locks it. The rest go their own way to another exit. Then he turns to leave the building himself. I scoot from the door before he sees my face and walk fast out into the dark hallway, thinking to myself that he must have sent the bluest members of his staff out a back door that just looked like a freezer. Why would they say goodnight and walk into a reefer full of frozen mammoth burgers, spare ribs, and Frontera pizzas? The lobby's still lit around the desk, but the stairs going to the second room floor rooms is lost in shadows. The clerk ain't at the counter, and there's just one desk lamp behind there shining right where he'd be working if he was on duty, which he should have been. And then the lamp goes out. Now I'm standing there in the dark by myself. There's light from a street lamp outside and maybe from the neon sign above the establishment, but it's not coming back where I'm standing next to the clerk's counter. The glow from them is just enough so I can see where the front door and windows are, and maybe I can catch a little glimmer from the brass rail following the stairs up to the second floor. By now, I am freaking. Where is everybody? Where's Arch and Fritz? I don't move from where I am, even though I want to be near the door. I figure I'll hang around for about 10 more minutes, and then I'm going to the shuttle stop down the street. No way I'm going to get counted AWOL. Just about the time I get tired of waiting and start moving slowly toward the front door of the hotel, I hear feet on the stairs, coming down slow and heavy, like the owners are tired and old. A couple of dark figures appear in the shadows, and I take a chance. Arch, Fritz, come on guys, we gotta get to the bus. Could have been anybody, but I was lucky it was them. They shuffle toward the door, and what I see in the dim light from outside is something I don't like. They're moving slow. They have these lost expressions on their faces, and there's something funny about their skin. In the shadows of the place, I can't tell what it is. I go out the door and they follow me, but they don't catch up. And they're not saying anything either. When we get to the stop and we're standing there in the cold drizzle, I try to make conversation. By now, some of the drizzle is turning into snow. Those girls were pretty nice, huh? Too bad you didn't have more time with them. A long silence. Finally, Fritz, in what sounds like a sleepwalker's voice, says, "Yeah, it's too late. Too late." I was about to ask him what exactly he meant. I mean, you could take what he said to mean there just wasn't enough time before the bus came to have some real fun, just enough to get your rocks off. Or did he mean something else? Was he too late for something? Were we too late? If so, for what? I started worrying about the shuttle. Maybe he knew something about the schedule I didn't. But then it pulled up, the shuttle bus with its big wheels and big windows for looking out at the giant structures and prefab buildings with their patches and ribbons of blood orange rust, the broken streets, the flat frozen tundra outside of Ishtar. And now the sky wasn't white, it was black with no stars because there wasn't any break in the clouds. Frozen rain mixed with snow was starting to fall, and it was freezing to crystal as it fell onto the bus in the fractured tarmac. I got in and my friends followed, but they didn't sit near me. They found seats in the back and not near each other. I didn't think anyone else was coming, but after a while this space crewman stumps up the steps. He looks even more sluggish than my buddies, and his color is so dark that I thought he was a black guy at first. He lost his footing for a moment and slipped on the rubber runway between the seats, reaching out a hand to grab a seat across the aisle from me. But his hand, when it hit the metal rail running across the top of the seat, his hand made a hard sound, like a glass bottle would make. And in the dark shadows in the bus, I could swear I saw a finger splinter off and hit the floor with a tinkle before sliding under a seat. He didn't seem to notice, so I figured I must have been seeing things. Then he found a seat by himself, too. The shuttle started rolling through town. I saw that all the other space crewmen who'd been milling around in the Funtown district were gone. Could have been that most crews had an earlier curfew than us, but it just seemed a little weird. Even with the carrier crewmen out of the picture 2 hours ago, there should have been more stragglers out there. Maybe even a few people with overnight liberty planning to party down and stay in one of the joints along the strip. We rolled down dark streets, passing under street lamps, stopping at intersections. Nobody was out in the dark. Where were they all? We didn't know. But then we came to the outskirts of town. Here there were no street lights, no street lamps, but the clouds had begun to clear, and into the starry sky with its long ribbons of pink nebula gas stretching from one horizon to the other, rose the huge greenish moon of Frontera 4. It was full that night, and by its sick light I could see the streets, the prefab houses covered with rust that ran like chocolate sauce or brownish orange gravy down their white sides. And that's when I saw that we weren't alone. The green light of the big moon caused the ice crystals that were forming on every surface to glisten like trillions of tiny diamonds crusting the streets, the lamps, the metal and plastic houses. And out from the shadows between those houses, Out of the alleyways and side streets, I see people coming out, moving slow, just sort of milling around under the green moon, looking up at it like they were hypnotized by it. Most of them were not dressed for the cold, but didn't seem to mind it. Our shuttle drove right through these milling crowds of dark figures, glistening and gleaming like frozen marble statues out there in the moonlight. Frozen statues that were moving, heading somewhere, not clear where. I saw a face turn to look at us, and as we passed by, I could swear his gleaming eyes of solid ice looked right at me and marked me, like he was saying without words and in complete silence, "You too, pal. You too." I heard a stir and looked behind me. Arch was coming down the aisle, walking toward the door, grabbing the backs of seats with his hands so as not to lose his footing. The driver caught his eye in the rearview mirror. "Sit down." "Look here, I want to get off the bus," Archie said. "You ain't going nowhere. Sit down." Arch stood for a moment about 2 seats back from me, then turned around and plumped back into one of the upholstered benches, not the same one he'd been in before. Under the light of that moon, we rolled across the tundra, and it seemed like hours. But after a while, we came in sight of the fleet, the huge array of spacecraft, some small and some huge, sitting out there in the frozen night, lit up with floodlights and surrounded by temporary security fences, waiting for the last of the returning space crew. I was good and scared now because something was off, and it wasn't just the town we'd been in. Something was off with Archie and Fritz, too, and this other space crewman who'd come back with us. I wondered about myself and decided to look in a mirror first chance I got. We came aboard, walking up the gangplank, where on the platform around the hatch I saluted the officer on duty and said, "Permission to come aboard, sir." He gestured me through along with everyone behind me. I walked down the main passageway to the head amidships, just aft of the mess decks, and after using the urinal, went right up to a sink. The whole place was lit up and warm, and it felt good, maybe even almost safe. I looked in the mirror. My face, my skin, my arms were warm and brown. No blue, no white. Looked like I was okay. Down in the darkened berthing compartment, I stripped down, folded my dress blues, and put them in my assigned locker. Around me, everyone was asleep, some of the guys snoring. Seemed normal there in the dark, and I had no trouble getting to sleep once I hopped up into my bunk, right under one of the overhead pipes, and turned on my side. Through the hatch up to the main deck, I could see that the passageway overhead lamps had been turned off, with just the night lights on up there. Looked like the crew was settling in for sleep. I drifted off to sleep myself then, and was slowly floating down through that darkness you get into before you really take the plunge into unconsciousness. Then suddenly there was this annoyance. I hear storekeeper third class Manning rolling around in his bunk just below mine. "Geez," he says suddenly, and then I hear him getting up. I open my eyes and see the guy dimly from the nightlight up on the main deck, and it looks to me like he's covered in sweat, even though he's sleeping in just his underwear. While I watch, he pulls his sheet all the way off the bunk and starts wiping himself with it, like he's toweling off from a shower. And the thing is that the berthing compartment ain't hot, it ain't even warm. It's cold, a cold which is seeping through our heating system from the sub-zero temperatures outside. But here he is, toweling off sweat and fanning himself with his hand. He drops the sheet in a heap on the deck. He goes to the ladder and looks up, then starts climbing topside, probably to pay a head call and get rid of some of that beer he was guzzling in Funtown a few hours earlier. I close my eyes and drift back off to sleep. They wake us up the same way every morning. After a good night's sleep, the lights in the berthing compartment come on, and I can hear the usual announcement over the ship's internal communication system. Now reveille, reveille, all hands heave out and trice up. The smoking lamp is lighted in all berthing compartments. Now reveille. The master-at-arms is walking around getting up the late risers. Hey, Hernandez, it's morning in space. Get your dumb ass out the rack. Do I have to personally pull you guys out on the deck? You know I ain't lying. If I come back by and you ain't headed for the showers, I will drag you there by the cojones. Get with the program. I hit the floor midway through his speech and pull my sheets and blanket tight. Bunk made up, I'm headed for the ladder to go above decks to the showers, when the master-at-arms says, Hey, where's Manning? Did he have duty last night? Nobody answers because they don't know where Manning is. Hey, Binkowski, the master-at-arms calls out to one of the other SKs who was up all night polishing the decks for a visit and inspection by the task force commander at 0930. Binkowski, you work with Manning, right? Was he on duty last night? Wasn't in the plan of the day, Binkowski says. He's supposed to be waking up with these guys. Well, he could at least have picked his sheets up off the deck. That rack had better be triced up before we go to quarters, or I will have his natural ass. Our division, Nav 1, the yeoman, the personnelman, and the navigation team, we line up in our usual spot on the O2 level, on a stretch of passageway just aft of CIC. Hicks has Chief Smith look us over. He tells me to get a haircut and Space Crew Apprentice Caraway to ditch the non-regulation buckle he's wearing with his web belt. It's got a picture of some Korean cartoon character on it. It's supposed to be plain silver like everybody else's. I trust you gentlemen had fun in Funtown last night, Hicks says. If it's starting to hurt when you pee, the corpsmen are keeping medical open until 2100 tonight. 1 shot in each cheek and you'll be as good as new. If you turn blue, however, report to an airlock and show yourself out. We laughed, but inside I was thinking about Romano and O'Halloran. If they weren't blue this morning, it seemed to me like there was a good chance they soon would be. I had to wonder why Task Force 2 gave us Liberty and Ishtar if this white Sif stuff was real and this widespread. I remember once when we were supposed to get Liberty on Mars and they kept us in orbit because of an outbreak of Crescent virus, the really contagious Epsilon variant. But here on Frontera 4, they let us go. And they seemed to be in complete denial about the existence of this thing, this white syphilis. Then Chief Smith asks, Where's Sotomayor? Isn't he the duty yeoman today? He looks at the plan of the day on his tablet, scrolling up from the article on proper care of shoes he's supposed to read, looks it over for a second and then says, Yep, Sotomayor, duty section 5. Anybody see him down in supply berthing or one of the heads? Not since last night, Chief, Caraway says. He went upstairs in Ishtar with a big round hoochie mama around 1900. I never saw him come down. You mean he wasn't on the shuttle with you last night? Asked Hicks, joining the discussion. No, I left at 2000. Hicks dismissed us with a worried look, and as I started to walk away, he huddled with the chief. I'd gotten about 20 feet down the passageway when I heard the chief yell, Santini, you're on duty until we find Sotomayor. Got it? Right, Chief, I told him. That's all I needed, I was thinking. 2 duty nights in 1 week. That afternoon, I'm walking down the main passageway, headed back aft to pick up an article the supply officer on duty had written for the plan of the day. Something about making sure your skivvies were properly labeled for the laundry bag if you wanted to get them back. Sure enough, Sotomayor had not turned up. Since we were in port, that would mean he was AWOL, which was bad enough. If he didn't show before we left planetside for space, that would be missing ship's movement, time in the brig, and a big fat reduction in pay and rank if he ever did turn up after that. I run into one of the grease monkeys, this engineer who works in the aft engine compartment. His face is streaked with black lubricant and his coveralls are filthy too. Hey, Santini, this troglodyte calls out to me as I'm passing him there in the corridor.
What the freak did you guys do with O'Halloran? I got 2 days of duty in a row with him missing. I ain't had a shower and a shave since Thursday."
I shrugged. "Sorry, dude, I don't know what happened to him today, but I swear to God he got on the bus with me last night." The trog, holding a greasy wrench in his left hand, scratched his unshaven face with his right.
"That would mean he's still on board somewhere. I tell you what, if I get a hold of him, I'm going to flatten his face."
"Look, I'll see what I can do," I say back to him. "I'll keep an eye open, and if I find him, he's all yours." By nightfall, I noticed that chow time is even more poorly attended than it was in the morning. Besides that, I'm seeing guys dripping with sweat now and again, their skin turning this dark color, kind of bluish. By now, I have the plan of the day nearly edited and ready to publish, so I go to the yeoman's office and sit down at a station with my tablet to put everything together. Edit the text, make it all flow, put in the illustrations and the duty rosters. 3 messengers, 1 from engineering, 1 from supply, and 1 from operations come in with corrections. Turns out duty section 6 also has people missing. So I'm editing all this crap, my back to the rest of the office. A couple of other yeomen are in there with me working on fleet correspondence. Suddenly one of them says, "Attention on deck." I stand up quick just like they do and turn to see the captain sticking his head in the upper part of the Dutch door we have on the compartment. "At ease," he says. "Got something new for you to put in your plan of the day, Santini." "Yes, sir," I say. "What is it, sir?" "I just had communications send you the text from DEFCOM Earth. Emergency order, all liberty is canceled. Port and starboard duty restored. Engine starts up at 2200 tonight. We launch 0630 tomorrow morning. I want you to put the text in the POD and publish that thing ASAP." "Yes, sir." Just like that, we were headed for space. I knew there'd be a lot of pissed off guys coming in from Ishtar over the next 2 hours. But hey, it wasn't my fault. I was just the messenger with the bad news. After I upload the POD, I wander through the passageways in the compartment, starting with operations up on the O2 level. They already knew because they're just aft of the bridge. They hear things right after the old man tells them. Then up to O3 to tell the fire control technicians and the communications specialists. Next down to engineering, all 4 propulsion compartments, hoping I don't get a grease job from these guys for bringing bad news. Last of all, the cooks, the laundrymen, the hull technicians, the electricians' mates, and the machinist mates. Everybody mad. Some of them asking me if I'd seen people, other shipmates who were apparently missing. I didn't know what to tell them. I wondered just how many people we'd left behind on Ishtar the night before and what exactly might have happened to them. The engines were humming loud by 2130, and all of us yeomen were crowded into the workspace typing up the out-chop and status docs, which had to be filled in, finished up, and sent to Frontera 4 and to DEFCOM Earth prior to takeoff. Frontera sent us their acknowledgement of received transmissions, but not a word from the home planet. Still, we had our orders, and even without the arrival of Task Force Alpha 1, we were going to be on our way home in half an hour. We had 3 guys missing from our work group, and personnel said they were short a space crew apprentice who hadn't gotten liberty at all, had been aboard the whole time. This got me to thinking. My mind kept turning back to that grimy hotel and bar we'd spent our liberty in, and about how people had disappeared. And when I went to satisfy my curiosity, I'd seen some headed out into the street, and others headed right into the freezer. I noticed just then that Y&2 Beccaria, working next to me, had broken out in a sweat. His skin looked darker than usual, too, kind of bluish. All of us there in that enclosed space. Suddenly, I felt kind of panicky, in part because I wondered if we weren't all subject to something very contagious aboard the Zumwalt, and also because the thought had just occurred to me about our reefer decks where we stored the food that had to be kept frozen. Was there a pattern here?
I realized in that moment that I had to get out of that workspace. I had to get out and find a place to hide. Wasn't exactly sure why, but I was sure it needed to happen. I submitted the last bill of inventory a supplier on Frontera 4 had given me, and that meant I was done with the work Chief Smith had laid out. "Hey, Chief," I said, "I'm done with stuff. You mind if I skate for a few minutes?" "You've earned it," said Tina. 36 hours on duty? Why don't you hit your bunk if you feel like it?" I was grateful for that invitation, but there was no way I was going to sleep down in that crowded berthing compartment again. I realized once I got headed down the central passageway of the Zumwalt that my mind had put two and two together and just hadn't told me about it yet. But here it was. The white Sif had gone from being a rare disease on Frontera to being an epidemic. DEFCON Earth must have known this had happened, but they ordered us down to the surface for replenishment and refit without a word or a caution. They'd allowed a huge rotation of crew from every ship in the task force to go on liberty in Ishtar where the disease was rampant. And even though it was clear we were missing crewmen not just from Ishtar but from the normal routine of the ship itself, that meant something was going on, something secret and deliberate. I couldn't imagine why Earth would want to infect an entire fleet of ships and crew, but it was clear to me that they deliberately let it happen. Maybe made it happen. And how did a disease get from the Ishtari to us? Sexual transmission for sure. Social transmission by proximity? Yeah, probably. It was spreading aboard ship, and I knew for a fact that while some of our guys had a romantic taste for one another, most of them didn't. So social spread in close proximity seemed very likely, and that meant that even if I hadn't touched one of those girls at the 69 Hotel, I had been sucking up air in close, small compartments with guys who might have a case of the icy blues and whites. Hoping to hell I wasn't infected yet, I started thinking about what to do next, how to protect myself. With people disappearing all over the place, if I fell out of sight, they'd count me as just one more. As I walked back towards supply berthing, I put together a plan. Guys were passing me left and right, a crew scurrying to get underway in 10 minutes so no one would have any questions about where I was going. I shot down the ladder past my bunk to my assigned locker. I grabbed a sleeve of crackers out of there that Ma had sent me in her last care package, along with a bottle of orange soda I'd traded some guy for over in operations. Then I started thinking about where to hide. There was a hatch in supply berthing behind the ladder in the deck that went down deep in the hull to an array of servers. It was well lit down there, and only techies ever climbed the ladder down to those units to service them from time to time. But if I had to go out, chances are I'd be spotted. Then I thought about the Combat Telemetry Center on the 04 level. Up there where on Wednesday nights a couple of guys would bring guitars, and we would sing oldie goldies while passing around a bottle of Everclear or a couple of joints of Bellatrix Premium. One of the fire control guys had told me that there was a compartment up there, a little one, that you could only get into by slipping under the deck plates and crawling up into it. He'd said it wasn't even on the blueprints, that space. And during routine flight on a trajectory home, there was virtually no chance at all that anyone would even come up there to combat telemetry. Who would we be fighting in the deep space between the Centauri system and the orbit of Pluto? My conscience was telling me all kinds of things, like, don't you realize that this is dereliction of duty? When they catch you hiding, you're going to get brig time, you're going to lose rank and pay. But then I reminded myself, whether I go back down into the thick of things or stay out of sight, they're still going to be asking where the hell I am before the week is out. One way at least I'm alive, the other way I'm probably a frozen turkey in a meat locker. Sure enough, when I climb up into telemetry, I'm alone, standing on a steel deck surrounded by servers and control boards. No one's been up there in 2 weeks or longer. A cup of coffee with a thick layer of mold over it is the evidence. I find where the loose plate is, the one where you can get in and climb under until you're on the other side of the bulkhead from the servers, in that little incognito space between telemetry and the storage compartment. I pull myself up into the dark space, dragging a plastic bag with my crackers and soda. I use my portable communicator to flash a light around. Nothing in the space but me because there was no door into it. There is enough deck to stretch out on. The chief had said I could get some extra rack time. I decided to take it. As scared as I am about what's happening, after 36 hours without sleep, I go under in the dark like I've been anesthetized. You know how, when you're just early on in a really bad part of your life, you wake up thinking everything's normal, but then after a minute or two it all starts coming back to you? You start remembering that after all, no matter how blissful the sleep was, you're still waking up in a world of shit. And here's another day to find out just how bad it is. After the precariousness of my situation comes back to me in a flood sitting there in the dark, I realize I gotta pee. There is a head call in my future, which means crawling back out of this space into whatever the situation has now become. I'm thinking of where I can answer the call of nature with the least amount of attention and recognition when it comes to me to check the time. When I hold up my portable, it says 1600. So okay, I've slept through liftoff, through the night cycle, and through most of a day cycle, so they've got to know I'm missing by now. I have a cracker and take a sip of my orange before stowing them in an angle iron in that dark space, and then I crawl back out into the lighted telemetry compartment. From there, it's down the ladder 3 levels till I reach the main deck and the passageway. At 1600, there should be some crew heading forward or aft as they carry out their duties or sneak back to work from skating on the mess decks with a cup of bug juice and a cigarette. I go to the aft head, find a urinal, and take care of the business at hand. I'm thinking it's awful quiet, like when you sleep through a general quarters alarm and you get up out of your rack wondering where everyone is, until you find out they're all at their duty stations except you freaking dumbass. But there ain't nobody, not even a fire crew on station in the passageway. I get to the yeoman's office and find the place empty. Just forward of us is the mess decks, and I should be hearing cooks and messmates cooking up mashed potatoes, or scrubbing pots, or yelling trash at each other while they're chopping carrots. But not a sound. I mean, there is no one back there in the galley, and no one sitting at the tables, not even a roving patrol taking a skate break on his way back aft. This is just plain weird. I go forward, climbing the ladder up to 01 with the idea of sticking my head in at the bridge. I'm not really supposed to go up there if I don't have duty, but I have an excuse. I'll ask the comms guy from CIC if they got their copy of the POD online, like I'm doing duty. I open the hatch quiet-like and stick my head in. No one. No helmsman. No officer of the deck. No captain and no XO. No comms guy from CIC. The place is clear, something which definitely wouldn't happen during a general quarters drill or on a flight from Centauri to Earth. So with that realization, I'm touring the ship from stem to stern, even going into communications where the first-class petty officer once threw me out on my ass because it's classified in there and I didn't have a clearance. The only thing I find resembling a person in the whole ship is a teddy bear belonging to Fire Control Technician 3rd Class Douglas Beatty, who always slept with this thing and left it out on his bunk. And about then, a little voice in the back of my head says, "Check the reefer deck." So now, I'm going below the main deck, down to the freezers below operations berthing where they keep the meat and other perishables. There's supposed to be a padlock on the door, but there ain't. I open it up and step inside into this big frozen space with its blue overhead lights, and that's where I get the revelation. They're stacked in there like cordwood. This freezer is huge, with several compartments, and as I wander from one to the other, hugging myself to try and keep a little bit warm, I'm looking at one pile after another of space crew and officers lying there motionless, one on top of the other. I reach out and touch S.A. Carraway, who I see lying there in a stack at just above eye level, his head turned sideways out of the stack, straight and hard as a belaying pin. His eyes, which are open, are like glazed blue marbles. I feel like falling to my hands and knees and puking, but I'm afraid my hands will freeze to the steel deck plates, so I fight back the urge. The cold actually helps me collect myself, and I back out of there once I feel ready to put one foot in front of the other. So now it's clear that I'm the last man standing on this spaceship. I have the place to myself, as they say, and a lot to think about. It's a weird feeling padding down empty passageways, past the ship's barber shop where no one is waiting in line for a haircut, past the SK hut where no clerks are on tablets entering data, past sick bay where the doors are thrown open and latched back, the place still open for the shots that no one's gonna get and no one is there to give. Through the mess decks where the galley stands quiet and deserted, unwashed pots and pans still sitting in the deep sinks back in the scullery. Up forward, I find that the door to officers' country opens onto a passageway of deserted staterooms. The wardroom is deserted too, and there's not one Filipino cook in the officers' gallery. The bridge and CIC I already know about. I was hoping to find one guy, just one other crewman to share in my misery, but here I am. Something strikes me funny, and I say it out loud in a stuck-up voice. Coffee will be served in the wardroom tonight. Sure, why not? The ship is mine. Maybe there's a lobster in the officer's reefer, or a real steak. Sure worth the attempt, I tell myself. But now I gotta figure things out. There's still hot coffee in the big warmer on the mess deck, so I pour myself a cup of joe and sit down. A thought occurs to me, and I go to the yeoman workspace just aft of the enlisted mess. There's my tablet right where I left it. I notice there's a SpaceNet connection icon, so I get an idea. Why not send a message over to the yeoman on the Admiral's staff? I don't personally know how to contact FleetCom, but I do know Y&3 Baker over there on the Admiral's flagship, the USSDF Rafaela Cortez. He'd get the word right out away that things are messed up on the Zumwalt. Hey Baker, this is Santini, I type out. Look, this is going to sound crazy, but we've had a virus outbreak of some kind over here on the Zumwalt, and it looks like I'm the only survivor. This is a mayday if there ever was one. Could you let somebody know, and I mean ASAP? Thanks, buddy. Don't ask me why I'm still alive. It's a long story. Please, this is no joke. Hurry. I see the received subscript, so I know the message has gotten there. Now I wait. And wait. And 2 hours later, with me pacing up and down between the empty tables on the mess decks, there is no reply. Nothing. Now I'm thinking about how I don't know how to use any of the comm equipment aboard the Zumwalt. Communications is not my rating, but I might have to start learning. I pick up my tablet to carry it with me and start climbing the ladder up to 01. Communications might be off limits, but there ain't nobody to throw me out now. When I reach the top of the stairs, it suddenly occurs to me. There's a reason that the message was received but no reply given. Every ship in Task Force Alpha 2 landed on Frontera. Every one. Every ship sent crew on Liberty to Ishtar. Every ship received returning crew from that Liberty, which involved, 2, maybe 3 duty sections before DEFCON shut it down? A vision passed through my mind then of reefers on all those other ships stacked with frozen bodies, freezers filled to the gills with men who had apparently walked voluntarily into those refrigeration units, like the girls at the 69 Bar and Grill. Men who are now stiff and hard as summer sausages in a commercial unit set at minus 18 degrees. I tried to piece together what might be some good news from this fleet-wide disaster. There might be other survivors. It might be good to set up camping communications in case any of them got through. Maybe we could hook up if we could figure out the equipment. It was a possibility. Another thing that might be good news is that we were all on a trajectory toward Earth, a path of travel that would have been laid in and programmed just after liftoff. Whether that trajectory included the programming to automatically put us into orbit around Earth, who knew? The navigators and helmsmen would have known, but they were all now cold as ice and as hard as iron in the dark of those reefers. I had another humorous thought about looking for a helmsman and thawing him out. I knew that wouldn't work, so whatever was going to happen from this point on would be up to me. If we were on a trajectory that would take us to Earth, what would happen when we encountered our home planet, with most everyone dead and with ships unable to control their trajectories? Wouldn't that make us man-made asteroids? And if we were man-made asteroids, unable to adjust for orbit or slow our acceleration, then we were probably going to slam right into the surface of home, loaded with nuclear ordnance and the awesome power of our own near-light-speed momentum. That would mean bye-bye Earth, wouldn't it? Jesus! Some of the smaller ships would burn up in the atmosphere, including probably the space cruiser I was on. But the spacecraft carriers and supply vessels? Forget about it. They were bowling balls headed for the pins, and I could see it was going to be a strike. I would have 2 years to think about this fate ahead of us. That is, if I decided to keep myself alive for the whole ride. That is, if I was allowed to live for the whole ride. But now I was in communications, and I saw on a digital display board up there that the time was 21:57. In 3 minutes it would be 10 o'clock at night by the cycles we followed, and the lights would rheostat down to dim for the time of sleep. Sure enough, 3 minutes later, it became nearly dark in there, the panels and controls all lit up with their interior illumination, but the compartment itself plunged into a relaxing gloom. And sitting there in the dark, a new piece of bad news floated into my mind. Almost as though I could hear it out loud, here came the voice of S.A. Carraway from out of my memory, recalling a discussion with Warrant Officer Hicks just before we hit the beach for Liberty. "They come out at night, don't they, Mr. Hicks?" he'd asked, meaning the bodies in the reefers. If Carraway was right about that, then the night cycle aboard the Zumwalt was about to become a lot more interesting. The Master-at-Arms controlled the use of padlocks on the Zumwalt, and they would have them contained and locked up somewhere. The thought of running up and down the levels looking for the reefer compartments and sticking padlocks on them was comforting, but not very realistic. And at 2200, they'd probably start waking up. I stuck my head out of the door of communications, listening for sounds other than the hissing hum of the ventilation, which was the background noise for life aboard the Zumwalt. I couldn't hear anything, but I kept my ears cocked for a while, just standing there frozen in the comm hatchway, standing perfectly still, listening for any sound of movement or activity. Just when I was ready to start breathing a sigh of relief, I caught it. The clanking sound of something hard on steel deck plates somewhere back aft. The clanking noises followed by the rhythm of walking or maybe shambling feet. I wondered in that moment just how screwed I was, just how fucked up my predicament would turn out to be once all the facts were in. And I began to calculate how I was going to keep myself out of sight. And something else I should have anticipated. It started getting real cold, I mean quickly, and here came one of the comm guys clanking down the corridor toward where I was standing. It was the same first-class petty officer who'd thrown me out of there before. I shot out of comms quick and started running down the passageway toward the bridge, thinking he'd be after me, but he didn't change pace. I could tell by the look on his frozen face that he could see me, knew I'd been where I didn't belong, and was ready to let it go, if he was thinking anything at all. Others followed him, and more frozen crewmen walked right past me toward the bridge, and CIC, as I stood there, apparently ignored. And the temperature was dropping. Realizing I wasn't in immediate danger, my thoughts turned out to how I was going to survive the night, not to say the rest of this flight home. I remembered a gear locker down below in the forward berthing compartment where the bosun's mates slept. There were heavy foul-weather bodysuits in there for working on the exterior of the hull in places like where we'd just been on Frontera 4. There were also spacesuits for effecting external repairs in flight. I bolted down the ladder from the O1 level and then up the central passageway to where steel stairs plunged down into the forward berthing compartment. The gear locker, I remembered, was where the hull started to converge into a point, leaving a cone-shaped space for storage behind a hatch. I hoped the hatch wasn't secured or I'd never get in there. Fortunately, it wasn't. It had been left open so crew could get in and out for carrying out the duties of the space and anchor detail just before takeoff. By now I'm shivering violently, and the cold feels like somebody is flaying me with a knife. But the suits are there, and boy, is it a relief to get one on, to zip it up and turn on the electric heating system. The suit has a hood, and this I pull up over my head, covering ears that were beginning to feel like the cold was slicing through them. In the warmth of the hood, they felt for a while like they were on fire, my ears, but then things were good. Then the question was, now what? And what did it mean that the crew, frozen and nocturnal, were now headed back to their stations? I was now taking my second tour of the ship, watching as men, frozen solid and yet somehow able to move, started to go about their duties, operating the ship like nothing had happened, not even turning on the lights to do it, operating by the dim glow of night lights, and not one of them said anything to me or to each other. What did it mean? That's when my portable started buzzing in my pocket. I took it out and saw that someone was trying to message me from the Fleet Admiral's flagship. "Congratulations, yeoman. Can you do face-to-face communications? I'm afraid my fingers don't work as well as they used to." Sounded like an officer the way he called me yeoman instead of by my first name. I replied, "Sure," and opened up my face-to-face comm for visual messaging. A head came up and I recognized Fleet Admiral Buller, even though his face was dark blue and his eyes seemed fixed and immovable in his face like two frozen marbles. "Good evening, Admiral," I said. "I didn't mean to disturb you personally, sir. Just thought I'd speak to your duty yeoman." "Not a problem, son," he replied. "I want to congratulate you again on your cleverness. We thought everybody'd gotten the bug by now, yet here you are, warm and brown as a hot, fresh bun from the galley. How did you do it?" "Well, sir, I had a place to hide. I guess if everyone else aboard the Zumwalt's got the bug, it's just a matter of time, right, sir?" "Not necessarily, son. We've had a couple of immune survivors aboard the Melania Trump. The Cortez has 5. "Sir, if you don't mind my asking, how come you don't seem bothered by what's happened to you and just about everyone else?" "Yeoman, what's your name, son?" "Santini, sir. YN2 Santini." "Okay, Santini, here's what's going on. You ever hear of a nanobug, son?" I had to think for a moment, but then, yeah, I remembered. Nanobugs, they're like tiny machines. Microscopic, right, sir? "That's it, son. Good memory. While our task force has been operating out in the Centauri system, things have gone south back on Earth. Food shortages got way worse, weather increasingly chaotic, then a war. They blew the planet apart. That's why Task Force Alpha 1 never came to Frontera. They not only never left Earth orbit, they never got off the ground. I thought about my family, my friends, my neighborhood in the Bronx back on Earth. Is it really that bad, sir? I mean, back home? Ain't no home to go back to, son, I'm afraid, he said. We're all gonna have to live somewhere else. That was a stunner. My mind started filling up with images of people dying, and I just had to close them off. Why didn't we stay on Frontera 4? We could have stayed there, couldn't we? Eventually, I don't doubt that some of us will. Be nice and comfy there now, won't it? But we've got work to do back in our own solar system. How do you mean, sir? Who's left for us there? Political problems in the solar system, rivalries, colonies on the planets jockeying for position with each other. Could be bad, could mean the end back on our home system. The fleet is needed there. Stability. Then, once things settle down, we can see where we end up. Admiral, you said something about nanomachines. Yes, our bio-combat lab on Frontera 4 had been working on a deployable version of HQV-17, which you know is white syphilis. Some years ago, they found a way to build a robot virus which could deliver all the symptoms of white syph. This little nanomachine could be adjusted, however, so that instead of being lethal, it allowed those who got its version of the disease to survive and stay functional. That's when the realization came that people could be engineered with these nano devices to function in a much wider range of environments than ever before. Imagine it, son, a human race able to survive and live comfortably in sub-zero temperatures on all the icy moons and frozen planets we've discovered, in a transformed body that doesn't breathe, that doesn't eat, that doesn't require artificial environments or special suits, except within the ranges of our sun or other stars where there is extreme heat. We lose some mobility, but we gain a wider range of possibilities for our future. I stood there in the passageway I'd been traversing when the Admiral's signal came through. I looked at his dark blue face, the stiffly triumphant expression he was managing to put on it. I couldn't think of a thing to say back, but my mind was racing to the implications. This was the future of mankind. All of us frozen solid, yet able somehow to move, to function with a big loss of dexterity, but still to move, to be alive, maybe even out in the frozen airless vacuum of space. What would we do about reproduction, growing new bodies, keeping the race going beyond the few thousand popsicles back on Frontera and the Centauri colonies, and in our own fleet of ships? Maybe they'd already thought the whole thing through back at the biolab on Frontera. Or maybe with a frozen body that could live forever, they figured they'd just get around to solving these problems eventually. It boggled the mind. It also made me wonder if this was something I really wanted to be part of. Admiral, I said, what about those of us who didn't get sick? What happens to us? I'll have to get back to you on that, Santini. For now, just enjoy the ride. The crew of the Zumwalt know the score now, and there will be some who adjust and some who don't. They have orders to leave you alone for the time being. Stay out of the way and fix yourself a bite to eat when you get hungry. The messmates and cooks will be assigned other duties, obviously. I was going to ask him about flushing frozen toilets, but I decided to let that go. I could rig up a portable heater in one of the offices' heads up front. I sighed. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to talk to a yeoman second class about all of this. Thanks for the big picture. No problem, son. Hang in there. If it turns out you're immune to the virus, as I think you probably are, I'm sure we'll have a solution before long. Things have changed a lot aboard the USS DF Zumwalt since that call. My former buddies have given me a nickname. They call me Warmy. I asked some of them how they felt about being made into human popsicles against their wills. They mostly shrug and say they'll learn to deal with it. Some, though, well, a few, to commit suicide, have found ways to pop out of the airlocks. That would have been suicide before, but now, if they thought it would kill them and relieve them of their misery, they thought wrong. They'll be out there tumbling through space, watching the stars spin around them until kingdom come, or until they end up in orbit around some sun or other out there. Whew, what a way to thaw. On the bright side, I've run into Romano and O'Halloran. I gotta tell you, it ain't the same. O'Halloran just ain't funny anymore. And Romano? His expertise with females is now obsolete, and he doesn't even want to talk about it. There ain't a blue pill in the world that's gonna help him in his current predicament. Us warmies around the fleet have formed a social group. We talk and FaceTime on our portables. We're dealing with grief about the bad news from back home, but so are the popsicles. And after all, it's good to be alive. Seems like the fleet has done us a solid. They've cleared crew off of a cruiser and renamed it the USSDF Noah's Ark. We'll be put together on board of her once arrangements are made, and we'll fly with the fleet till we reach Pluto's orbit. Then it'll be up to us what we want to do, stick with the popsicles or go our own way. Right now, it's mighty cold aboard the Zumwalt, but hey, I got the officer's galley all to myself. All the bacon and eggs, all the steak and lobster I can eat until the Noah's Ark arrives. Everyone else is scared of the kitchens and nobody has an appetite but me. I'll miss the chow, but you know, it'll be nice not hurtling through space at minus 18 degrees centigrade. Santini, over and out.
You have been listening to Tony Stregonona's dark science fiction tale, The Reefers, on Vulture's Rainbow Theatre. This is Damon Vulture reminding you that Vulture's Rainbow is your mobile home for dark art. We thank all our patrons who joined us recently at Trader's Village and walked away with magical charms, copies of the novel Beggar's Night, also available online at Amazon, and dignified portraits of demented clowns. May you have a good night and dark dreams.